most recently, okay, we're recording now. Most recently, can that be removed off the screen? I can't take it. Can anyone else see that? It says this meeting is being recorded by the host. I can't.
I think you just have to hit OK.
Actually, I can't. I don't, there's no cursor here. Okay. We'll go back into it. So,
Sorry about that.
no problem. This is wallpaper that was inside that home that gathered a certain patina. So there are parts of Cleveland that I feel like these Art Deco fading colors exist everywhere. And I didn't know that this was an imprint on my color palette as an artist until I began living in other cities and became obsessed with these certain teal tones and marbles and other types of blue tinges and things that had been discarded. But to me, they became revered. I like to show the industrial layout of the cities too. So I spent time living in Detroit, and a lot of artists have studios in the Russell Industrial Center, which was it's only occupied like a third of it because the place is a massive former tank military factory, and it was, I had a studio in there, and it was a difficult place to work because the air quality was really poor. So this is something that artists run into. It seems really romantic to move into these post-industrial spaces, and I'm not incredibly familiar with Philadelphia, but I know you have these places too. And I took this picture because every year there's a techno festival that goes on in exchange with Berlin and Detroit. So it's kind of interesting they put that on our studio building. This is where I used to work when I was in my 20s. I'm a trained set painter. So I became an apprentice and an intern, and I'm trained in the Guild of Scenic Painting, which is a professional practice. And it's a very special niche of the theater. And we would produce work. This is a former elevator factory that faced the lake. So a lot of these places would be semi-abandoned. They wouldn't have electricity or water. So we'd have to figure out how we were going to bring water to do the painting, or what time during the days we were going to work. There's all kinds of combinations. I did work in scene shops that had those amenities, but there were a lot that didn't. And this whole time it was fueling my information. So this is me in Detroit gathering materials. So I began at one point, my theater career transferred into my contemporary art practice slowly, because I was in theater 18 years, and I'd say about into my 10th, 11th, 12th year, I began really practicing sculpture and trying to get into graduate school, which I couldn't figure out how to. Eventually, I got into SVA in Manhattan, and I continued to work. I continued to make installation, and it expanded and expanded until my studio could no longer hold those projects. And I began getting more commissions in the Midwest. And I thought it could be really great if I moved there for a period. So I took my practice to the Midwest and still maintain ties to my gallery in New York, which I've been working with for about 12 years. And so I would get commissions and raise money to do my installations, as well as continue gallery shows. In this instance, I became a scavenger. And as a young teenager, I would go into these buildings in Cleveland with my family for recreation. I just thought that was a good idea. And it had a lot to do with how our family worked in industry in previous generations. So it was curiosity. And it also reminds me of archaeological, what my fantasy would be like an archaeological dig would be. So I think that like places like Detroit are abbreviated, have abbreviated history in 100 years, say at site diggings that I've seen in Italy that span from Roman times. I'm like, this is the connection. Detroit is exactly like the Romans. I mean, far stretches for an artist, but this is the kind of mysticism and things that I think about, how we maintain things as human beings and what it means to transfer information, what it means to lose information. And generally when I scavenge, I'm not taking things from that haven't been vandalized. There have been vandalized, and I pick them up. Here, this is aqua glass that is in all of the auto shops and auto producing factories that they soften the light for the workers and the machinery and the patinas on metals and painting. So you see this in Cleveland and here in Detroit. This is the Chrysler building in Detroit, which has been abandoned since I think 85. So I'm not an expert at these places, but I'm very curious about them. And there are artists that have a very deep devotion to going into these places and photographing and doing interventions. I'm interested in being there, feeling it, and replicating it. There's an example of the glass. Here's some of the things that I find and then bring back to my studio. This I put this picture in my lectures because sometimes my art looks like this and it gets thrown out. So don't feel bad if your art looks like this and goes away in a truck to a dumpster. Here are some of my process shots. I'm like, that's the most beautiful building I've ever seen. The color, the shape, the patina. Here's another, here's like complete luxury, and the building is suffering from arson, but it's fascinating to me that now it's just a shell that they're trying to preserve. This is a building in Detroit that I have my eye on over the years that I go back and look at every season to see if it's still left, and I'd like to do a project there. This is a thing of beauty. I'm showing you things that inspire me. Car parts in Western Michigan. It's Padnos. It's a whole series of scrapyards that have one incredible organizational skills, and I got special permission to go in there frequently and look at how they organize materials and dispose of them or recycle them, send them out on barges on Lake Michigan to China. And I find just the whole process and the kinetic the energy from being a real thing to this fascinating process in my own work. Here's the first example of my actual work. This is an installation that I did in Detroit in 2017. And it has a lot of casted materials from objects that I made and then casted that have domestic, what do I want to say? It has domestic relevance to the story of my family or these cities. And I'm interested in sacred space and creating these sacred spaces that are a little ominous. They're a bit tomb-like. And I just gave myself permission to create my own environments, my own perceived religion from bits and pieces of industrial history from my family's deep Catholicism that they revere to my travels and education in Europe. This is directly related to some of the cathedrals I would walk into, as well as my theater background. I sometimes can't stop myself, and I mentioned that a lot to the students today. So you don't have to show everything, but sometimes I do. A lot of the blackened material is scavenged from burned homes in Detroit. Here's some examples of things that I like to look at that are but they're also part of nature. So this building was open for a number of years, and I would go back there and take materials with a knowledgeable assistant. So this is a result of some of those materials. The frame is made from that home, and then these objects are wax, and they're cast from my personal jewelry and from my family's icons. And I use them as this religious sort of death funerary transfer of materials and goods and the past. This is what it looks like when I do a gallery show. So that large installation you saw, I made like a small sarcophagus for myself, which is lined with castings of my family's silverware and cups. And then I silver plated, not silver plated, I used aluminum to make it look like silver. And there's wax in the glass, and they're pretty theatrical and over the top. I mean, this could be in some Shakespeare play. But I love them. Like they make me feel comfortable about some kind of history that I don't understand. It's painting to me. I see my installations as a version of painting. Like that was a great moment of freedom for me when I realized like that the material I was using was the metal or the plaster or the glass was like a tube of paint I'd squeezed out onto my palette and like treat the glass like that, or the plaster or the marble. And I got some questions today like about being fearful about creating large work, and I have trouble scaling down because I have no fear of materials, and it gets me into trouble sometimes. But here's how it gets me into good trouble. This is a house that I had an NEA grant in Western Michigan. And I always had this fantasy that I could like carve up a house because that's what my work was about. And that happened. So I used the grant money to move the house into another location. And this was with, I worked with this curatorial group called Site Lab for about 5 or 6 years, and they only did large scale installation projects. So I would be a part of these group shows. It was pretty incredible. So this house was only one of 11 that artists, very artists were working on. So I took building and I had a pedestal, a concrete pedestal foundation poured, so it became a sculpture. And I would work on this 8 hours a day for 3 months on scaffolding, and I took it apart mostly by myself because I was interested in how it works and how do you pry things apart? What is the strength of the wood? What is rotted out? What is the history inside? So slowly I peeled back further and further, cleaned it, painted it, and it became like a shrine to what I feel about transference of property, the trappings of domesticity, the feelings of class, and what the dive of industry did to these cities. But I think a lot about preservation and transformation, and this work was that. I like maximal things. I really respect artists that can work minimally, artists that revere 1 or 2 materials, because I just can't control the amount of stuff that I want to add. I always wanted to add. So this piece became extractive. I was like, how can I add in an extractive way? So I treated this building like and I learned how to drive this thing. I learned how I had never come in contact with. And the final result was there's various cuts all over the building, kind of like drawings. This was what it looked like on the inside. So I removed the sheathing on the outside and all the plaster on the inside and created this line work that some of my drawings have. And throughout the day, it had this really beautiful effect where those windows looked like paintings, and the line work on the floors. This was it at night. So unexpected project with lots of surprises. That's that project. Okay, so I want to show you more process because that's the mystery of installation. So this piece doesn't look like so much right now in this stage, but this is a project I went to Norway to do, and they wanted me to come for 16 days. And I was like, I'm pretty sure Norway is good at recycling, and they're not going to have the same loads of waste and materials that I have in the Midwest. So I decided to shift my practice with what they do have a lot of, natural resources. And I worked with an arborist from the city to collect materials. And what I found was people would bring me parts of their favorite rhododendron bush or their grandfather's, and it became a shrine of legacy through bushes and trees that would only grow in that region because of the cold. And so I added jars of seawater and other materials, and eventually it looked like this funerary ship. I mean, almost Viking. And I experimented by coating the whole piece in sifted concrete to create a grayscale and then saturate it with light. So these unexpected projects have given me ways to do acrobatics of watching what went on in the theater, to experiment with new ways, faster ways. I didn't have time to paint this whole thing, so just letting it get down with sifted concrete was the best I could do, and it was a good surprise. So I think I have another picture of it. Here it is, with the concrete getting poured on it, and there's like the domestic movements and drawing type things that I do. And there it is, a totally different world. So I'll just show you a few more projects. This is one of my favorite places I've ever. So you may know it, that it's a museum that's dedicated only to installation. And they allowed me to, I did this project before the house project. I was like, wow, wouldn't it be great if I had a house? And then it happened. So this was a project before that. And I used a lot of materials from various Pittsburgh dumpsters that were the same circa as this building. This is the building process. So I wanted to punch holes in the walls and do lighting, and so you can't really just destroy the we came up with a compromise where I built walls in front of the walls and did that, and I covered the floors with canvas, and this is the result. So I'll just go back and show you. It looks so much bigger when it's finished, but this is covered in materials that remind me of the interior of my family's home, and a lot of times it was a painting, like a painting of the impression of what I felt or saw. There's that wallpaper that's painted. I became obsessed with lathing, which is what is made of a lot of these homes and places that have plaster smoothed over it. They begin to crumble and the lath shows through, and I'm like, oh, there's got to be another world in there. So I want to show you some processes as a sculptor and installation artist, especially having a student practice, how I communicate with others. I work with a lot of people when I make my work. I mean, most of the time in the end, it's just me, but I consult a lot of people, like, how would I build this safely? This is what I want to build. And I show them a photo or of things that inspire me, or I do these kind of half drawings, half blueprint impressions, and they help me figure it out. This, I did a proposal for Untitled Miami, and then executed it with a contractor. He helped me design the system behind it, and this is the outcome at the art fair. So in the front, like this, I had 3 days to install, so everything has to be organized, like driven down there. It's like a small theater company, like everything goes in its place, and it has its own box, or the system comes together at a certain time. And my work is very heavy, so it can be a burden, but this is how it looks before it goes in. And lots of people see my work is very chaotic. It is controlled chaos, but this is it's very controlled before it gets put in place. I like to see it all in order, and then it's cataloged in. So there's metal there, there's bits of homes, drilled dining room tables. Those are all, I began casting my family's possessions. And part of that was coming to terms with like not wanting to own the things that they held on to for so many years. Like I found them beautiful, but as an artist, I didn't have place for them or transporting them or holding on to them. So I found my own way to own them. And so I want to show you a little bit more about the environments that have influenced me. This would be something that maybe I saw as a young person, and I saw this in Detroit, took a photo of it, and I think 3 or 5 years earlier, I made this piece, and you can see the correlation between the colors and the chaoticness. This is an abandoned hotel in Western Michigan, and I did a 25-foot installation here, and it's all found materials over a period of a month that I collage. It's a or painting. This is another side of it. So this is the only thing that exists is the photograph after. So I would meticulously photograph these pieces for a number of days. Here's another building that I liked to go in when I was younger. And here is, oh wait, oh no, too much, back. Okay, that's another building. And then this is the same building. And I was like, wow, look at that. And years earlier, there's really no distinction between the colors. This is glass. So I smashed glass and created this painting. This was part of that very large piece, the 25-foot piece. So part of it was you had to look, was that glass? What is that material? And so I really love painting. This is my grad school at SVA in 2010. And again, I made a room within a room here. And I wanted to illustrate how versatile a studio can become. Like some students were asking me about, well, how do you start installation, or where would you do it? Well, you can build it pretty much anywhere. Like you can make a closet in your studio. This is how it looked in the studio. I deconstructed it. It was a regular, like three walls with drywall, and then a covered floor, and just compounded on. And I've got some kind of mess of dyed water there with light projected through it. But this wacky project was what got me the gallery that I now show with 12 years later. She saw this and thought, what is this? And so this went to the gallery. So this was my first show in 2010. This was one of the pieces, and I took it directly from the graduate studios and put it into the gallery. So I just wanted to illustrate that. The last few images are going to be current. This is me in 2020. I was explaining today that I don't have a dedicated studio, and I haven't had a dedicated studio for about 7 years. And it's a lot of freedom for me, because it's a big expense, especially for installation. So when I have a project, I gather specific materials for that project, and I work in spaces provided for me, or I find free spaces. And in this case, this was the garage where I was living in during the pandemic. And sometimes I make small works. This is like a curio cabinet of my small scale. I make a lot of drawings. I haven't showed many of those, but This is also a version of a drawing of a sculpture of a storage of materials. This is a small installation, 2020. It's got a lot of information about natural material. It's kind of a blend of the Norway project with to see here in Cleveland, the sticks, the natural stones from Lake Erie, this bizarre cabinet of curiosity that reminds me also of my family's homes. I wanted to show a few more drawings of unrealized sculptures. So it's really good to have some paper around when you can't have a studio and you're like, well, this is what I want to build someday. And then those get drawn, all the month of December, like, well, maybe it looks like this or this. So then if I have proposals, I can pull them out and use them. Here's another proposal, unreal. This is a realized sculpture, and I like showing this because the finished project doesn't look much like this. Every project has a timeline. Some of them have massive limitations that come out of nowhere. Some of them have, they're not well funded. Some are really well funded. And a lot of times I'm battling with some kind of environmental element, which is what I've found over the years. And in this case, I was battling with the heat in Minnesota in the summer. So this was for Franconia Sculpture Park. Sometimes I like to use my body as the first thing that is the measurement for all my sculptures. So here, I was laying out in the field and one of my peers at the residency photographed me, and I said, I don't think anyone's ever seen this. So I'm showing some process. I have a library of molds, like over many years, maybe 8-9 years, and I keep them, and a lot of them are not in good condition, which makes for very interesting castings. So here's me, spoons and doorknob bits, like accumulation of family materials, and a book. So I cast a book as well. And I like to make, this is one of my favorite things to do, make these like graveyard of castings. And here, this is at Franconia Sculpture Park, and it has a mixture of limestone from the region, which doesn't make a very stable concrete, by the way. So I also like that, like things that determine deterioration rate. Here's some details. There's spoons, there's plates, there's cups, there's weird teapots, there's other things I've made, this visual language. This is the final piece, but it was meant to be like this sacred walkthrough. I wanted to, the sculpture park had a lot of very large metal works, and I wanted to make something that was quieter, more reflective for people to walk through. And the history of the Rust Belt. So I built this structure, and you can walk through it, and there's kind of like a canopy of strings, and it's outside for 2 years. So it's becoming weathered. There's flowers growing inside of it now. I'll show you some of the interior. So one side is all industrial, like special selected metal. Some of the metal I brought from Cleveland and Detroit. I saved metal, and there's also wood from the region. The other side is full of castings, like it's a little carry-out cabinet full of Madonnas, which I see as the goddess, the collective goddess of many religions, but they also represent my family as individuals, and the faith they have, and my observation of them as a group. Also, it's like a tribute here's a close-up of spoons and icons and other materials in this sort of dreamy world. In the background, you can see some of the logs that I've honed from the area and then painted and put in this white world. Again, the light, you can see how I was emulating the house that I once took apart with the lath, but it's true to the region. It's natural wood that we planed down. And again, I had a lot of help on this project. That's the interior. It's also really important to learn practical things, like this is open to the elements all months. And there's no way to there's no fence around. I had to make it vandal proof. It's very tempting to want to take some of those objects, which would happen across this place. So a few more projects I'm going to touch on are, this is one in Spain that I did in March. Here I had a lot of limitations. So I did a lot of research by I was in rural Spain in Andalusia, and it was really a very cold winter there. And so I did a lot of research going to churches and seeing how religion is done there in Catholicism. And these were the colors and the shrines and the objects that I made on this 300-year-old building. It's temporary. And this is me here in Cleveland last month. Did a project that went up to the Chautauqua Institution just a couple of weeks ago. And so I didn't have a studio, and I produced this in my backyard in Little Italy. So there's a lot of paved backyards, and I just began working in the backyard because it's poured plaster and concrete, and it's perfect for working outside. So my neighbors were very curious. It created a lot of discussion. I was really worried at first, but the patron saint of Little Casting Mary, and that here's me in my outdoor studio. That's my casting station. And some of the molds I have they're old, or I've gone into used brush molds where you can just brush over architectural details and take a mold right then, and then peel it off. So I have molds from buildings that I've gone inside of and collected, or there's been residencies I've been on that have been interesting buildings, and they've allowed me to go into those as well. I just like these pictures. It's an example of, I amass all this and then I use it again like paint once I get on site. So you can see on the left, it's they're flowers, and I took this from a mansion, and it's carved oak. So it's carved oak flowers made into a casting and then poured in plaster and concrete. So this is one of the final projects. It's a small version, a lot like what I did at Franconia, which they requested a similar piece and they had seen that. So the outside, it has windows, and the inside has the same kind of fantasy type story of objects. It creates this chaotic poetry and information that I like to get the viewer intrigued about. This is an even smaller version of it. It's almost like a ship's prow that contains this like funerary information. And the lighting is always something that I'm like, oh, that happened. That's really exciting. And that's my last image, which is the railway in Detroit, where I used to live near. And I just wanted to show you that it could be beautiful there too. So I'm wrapping up my talk here at 45 minutes. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen, and then I'm open to questions.
So you guys can either Put the questions in the chat or just unmute yourselves and ask, whichever is easiest for you guys.
Yeah, so I would just go ahead and say how I loved that one, the one piece you did with the blue house, and towards the beginning, and how you fractured the not the shingles, what are those things called? The wood pieces in it, and it almost looked like an optical illusion. And then the inside of the house was just completely different. And I probably one of my favorite pieces of yours. It's not really a question, but like just an observation that I had.
Thank you. That was a magical piece. That was a magical chance to get a building. Like years later, I'm like, oh yeah, it's really hard to get a whole building.
Yes, it was very magical. It just, I wish I could see it in person.
Yeah, that piece, it existed just a short time. I finished it, I think in September, and then it was demolished in November. And it went down like a paper bag because I had taken it apart so much. And it's actually, it's the value of not working somewhere where there's a lot of regulation. And unfortunately, like a project like that, somewhere near an art center, a city that was a serious art center would be impossible. But because I was working and respecting and getting to know the community and contractors there, they found what I was doing intriguing. And they would even bring firemen by and be like, this is what happens. The whole thing goes on fire right in there. The whole thing is a tinderbox. And they'd be like, oh my God, look at that. So just like really interesting things would happen that I was intrigued about. And I got to meet the woman that she donated that property to Habitat for Humanity. And that house she had once had, she's like, that they were demolishing it and building new housing. And she said that house had such tragic stories. And she's like, I'm so glad to see it end like this. And that made me feel really, really good that I could be a part of that, because it was a precarious thing, like taking viable housing and turning it into a sculpture, like with our government's money, like NEA money, like, but it turned out to be a good thing.
Hello.
Yeah.
Oh, sorry.
No, you're okay. We just have a few questions in the
Sure,
chat,
I'm
but
ready.
if you don't mind if I ask those first.
Yeah, go for it.
Go ahead.
So Taylor asked, what would you say was the most valuable lesson you learned while working in theater that influences your practice now?
There's probably two things. One, I don't know everything 100%. And when I'm working with assistants, interns, I try to value everyone's opinion. I have mine, and that's where the ship's going. But it's really important to work with others and to respect them. And that's what I've seen in the theater, that things get done in a collective manner. And I address my work like that, and I like working with others, and it works best when I trust them. I learn a lot too. I mean, I learned how to drive that telehandler. That's crazy, right? Like, or I learned how to use a chainsaw properly, or because I admit to the person that has been using it their entire life, I have no idea. No, I can't hold that. No, I don't know what I'm doing. Also that I have a couple other rules. One is I finish everything to 80%, because that's what we do in the theater, because you don't have enough time generally to meet the deadline. And if you reach 80%, it's still okay for the audience, and you can go back in and work on it. And so what I've learned a lot is you don't have to make exactly what you think you want to make. And there's a lot of leeway within that. You can still express your idea if you can't get the materials you need 100%. Or if you don't have enough time, you can still express your idea. Thanks for that question.
Yeah. There's another one from Brighton Smith.
Mhm.
He asked, can you go more into specifics on the practicalities of installing your work at an art fair?
Yeah, that
I
was
will
fun.
reach out to you.
Pardon? Okay, the art fair question. Well, that one, it's a lot like working in theater. It's really much more intense because you're totally behind the scenes. Installing in Miami, it's hot. It's unionized. You have to, when you arrive there, there's an order with the truck. And I have to tell you all that I generally drive my own work around the country. It's another skill I have is truck driving. So there's just a lot of stuff you're going to do for your art that you don't think anyone does, and we do it. Sometimes my work gets transported, but mostly I do it. It would be very expensive for an art handling company to crate my work and transport it. I've had it happen in like a museum type setting, and it's painful for me to watch them come and meticulously wrap each thing. And I'm like, I'm just gonna squish it in there. Like, so yeah, for the fair, you arrive in the truck and there's a queue and you wait, and then they allow you only a certain amount of time to unload. I had there were 4 of us, so I had two art students working with me because they were being paid, but it was part of their schooling too, to come down to the art fair. And I was working with a curator who just does everything. So he and I are unloading, and we're figuring out how you have to move everything really quickly to your location, and you have to be escorted by these guys that are in the union, and they're not messing around. Like, they've got like how many hundreds of galleries to work with, and you've got this insane artist with this massive piece and like metal chunks, and they want you out of the way as fast as possible. Like, that's what I learned at the art fair. But we knew this going in, so we had everything over prepared, which there's no over preparing. And we worked into the night because the faster it's installed, the less trouble there is. So we did it, I think in 3 days, we had 4 days. So we had goals each day that we had to meet. And we didn't install it because, and there's galleries from all over the country, and I mean all over the country, all over the world. And it's just kind of a messy thing. People trying to communicate was a messy thing. So we tried to be as efficient and polite and accommodating as possible to the people that are union working there. And polite is a big thing because they know what they're doing and they have the keys to the kingdom, and you're not going to get anything unless you're polite. So just remember that when you're installing. That was my experience. And then it happens on the other end. At the end of the fair, they do things like they turn off the air conditioning, they close the toilets. Like, it's kind of inhumane, which happens on the other end, which I've been used to working in a theater. And then again with the queue and the truck, and you have to have everything prepared. And that time it rained, so we had to load the truck in the rain, the tropical rain. So I don't know, it just makes for great, like, over the top stories. I'm so glad you asked. The art fair itself is really, I enjoy it. A lot of artists think I'm crazy because I like to see all the people and I like to walk around and look at things, but like, it's a weird place.
May I ask a question?
Yeah.
Hi, thank you so much for your sharing, this wonderful practice. I really enjoy it. So I'm more interested, although I am able, I guess, to piece bits and pieces of it through your presentation, but when it comes to, let's say, the emotional, spiritual context that you imbue your projects with, right? Because the collecting, I guess it's all part of that ethos that gets you into the project. But do you a process as to, you know, that kind of like results in embedding all those emotions and capturing them beyond the sketches, the collecting and all that? I mean, it's a very esoteric question, but I'm interested, let's say, in the one you did in Spain, you know, and all related to Catholicism and all that, how do you make sure that all of that collective thinking that you are executing on is captured in your work of art?
Thank you for that question. I definitely danced around that issue and didn't address it directly. It's an elaborate one because it's the conceptual basis of my work, and it's evolved over years. And my fascination with spirituality, which when I first started practicing as an artist, I was told not to talk about. And today it's a different world. And so I watched how my family, I was raised a different version of Christianity than my family. And I watched them with Catholicism, and it was fascinating to me because I never got the explanation. No one ever filled me in on what was going on. And so that probably served me really well as an artist. Like, oh, look at that. Well, that's pretty. Well, look at that. And then slowly but surely as an adult, I would be told what these things were for. But for me, living in the homes of my family, it was just seamless in their day-to-day activities. And I saw how their reverence for object was also connected to their religion, like keeping things as women, like keepers of special things or types of food to make, or how they said prayers, and like all of these things were sacred to them and mysterious to me. So as I grew as an artist, I was like, oh, well, I can claim all kinds of spirituality in my work because there's a collective human consciousness of connection to spirituality and what makes things sacred. Like, why are all these houses of worship sanctified and set aside from our daily activities? I mean, as I was saying, they were in the daily activities, but the buildings themselves, as a 20-year-old, I went to Europe and saw a lot of objects that I was like, this is so intriguing. And I was interested in how people preserved history and things that were sacred. I have a whole series of intricate drawings that I do of symbols because I really believe that symbols have power. And I'm hoping someday to exhibit those, but they're very elaborate. And it's hard when you're a sculptor and they're like, well, we don't want to see your works on paper. But those works, they're beautiful, they're simple, they're made up geometry, and there's no made up geometry because we are made of all of these sacred systems, whether it's scientific or I had this experience. I went in Italy where I went into a baptistry from Roman times, and I was like, what is this crazy feeling? And I looked around the room and I'm like, I'm in an octagon. I've never been in an octagon. And this is like the weirdest sensation and vibration in here. And later, I find out that the octagon is the number 8, which is infinity, which is connected to all kinds of religious. And so I'm sensitive to this kind of thinking and feeling. And I bring all that into my vision and into my view. And then this carefulness of consideration and viewing goes into my work. And it happened in Spain. And this is, just in March. And so as I age as an artist, I just let it happen. And I was like, I know if I go and look at these buildings I've never been in, that people have been worshiping or asking for things or expressing gratitude for decades, that I'm going to feel something. And I'm a stranger here, but because I'm a part of this human collective, I'm going to be able to absorb it. And so that particular region of Spain was really about, they were into shepherds and the sacredness of that. And so I would go select buildings and go to them. And then I would talk to people about rituals. And then I would hike the countryside. And I found in that area of Spain, because of the Franco oppression, there wasn't a lot of material to work with. And I was like, what do you mean there isn't any thrift stores? They're like, there's no thrift stores. Everything's been used. And I'm like, well, I guess I better gather from nature. Like that's what's been going on here for forever. And so I used the power of nature in that piece in Spain, and I was able to connect with that wall. There were plenty of ruins to work with. So I was able to connect with that object that had been made by human hands centuries before. And I felt a little nervous about that. I was like, I don't know how this is going to go, because I don't want to pierce any kind of peaceful thing that's going on here. So I made a very simple installation with, there's cork in that region of the world. So I used a lot of cork and roses, cast roses, and oranges. Like the oranges were going there. So I kept it simple, and I didn't have, I had a lot of limitations there, which I won't talk about, but it just happens. Sometimes you go there for 5 weeks and you were really only able to produce for 14 days for many, many reasons. So that's what happened with that project, but I was happy with it at the end. I was like, wow, it really embodied the feelings that I've had at other times. So that's sort of where my personal spirituality lies among my work, where I can draw from any region, hopefully, and learn something.
I think we have time for one last question. Of course, everyone can leave if they need to. But yeah, we'll do one more wrap up question. If anyone has one.
There's one in the chat,
Uh-huh.
I believe.
What's that
Yes, it's
say?
from Bridget. It says, I enjoy the component of memory present in your work and the idea that things are not what they once were. Do you consider writing or journaling to be a component of your practice, perhaps alongside the photographs?
Let me just think about that for a second. I certainly do a lot of visual looking. I mean, looking at places and objects and holding them. There is some writing. I used to do more writing, but I'm really compelled by looking more so, and by moving my hands, because it tells me a lot of information I don't know is there. Kind of like writing. If you're writing, you're like, oh, I didn't know I felt that, and that goes on. Well, I really recommend as an artist, just like making things, and it's the same gesture as writing. I like walking does it too. I don't really combine photographs in a book, but I definitely have a phone that has thousands of photos of things on it that I review frequently. And I was like, oh yeah, I was gonna do that and that. And I like looking at wallpaper on the internet and never purchasing it, but something about looking at the era of things that I really like. I love going into period rooms. Yeah.
Awesome. Well, thank you.
It was really nice to be here today. I was excited to meet everyone. You're welcome. See that in the chat.
Yeah, so if there's no other questions, we're gonna wrap it up. Thank you so much, Julie. It was a beautiful talk.
Thank
You can
you.
just stick on with the coordinators for a few minutes. We can
Okay.
talk for a little bit, but everyone else, thank you for coming.
Julie.
We appreciate you.
Bye, Omid.
That was a really good presentation. Thank you.
Oh, you liked it. Great.
Yeah,
It's a little
I-
bit different.
Great photographs. No, I like that when it's different. It's a little refreshing.